17th century pilgrim from the Renaissance land of Italy described the town this way. Sighisoara is a healthy and diligently hospitable town located in the valley at the bottom of a hill which is partly scattered with buildings up to the top where the fortress lies. This fortress is rather gracious than fortified. This last sentence eloquently describes the state of the impressive quadrilateral and polygonal towers, 14 still today, from which 2 serve as gates for the fortress. This elegant and imaginatively placed fortress in a landscape of forested hills is almost surely the work of local craftsmen. We must only consider that Stefan Ungar, who built the beautiful fortified church of Kloster in the 16th century, came from Sighisoara. Slender and more decorative than efficient in defending the upper town, Sighisoara's towers, which outline the fortification, has a length of 930 meters and has become a tourist legend in this part of Europe. A visit here would start at the bottom of the clock tower, which imposingly guards the main entrance of the fortress. Severe with its facades rimmed by little windows and by the consoles at the upper floor, this tower served as the council's meeting room as well as a depository of Sighisoara's archive and treasures. Built in the 14th century, but revealing to us today the look that was given it in the 17th century and even later, the tower is so picturesque due to its double moat, the defensive arrangement that controls access, the entrenchments, guard path and gunnery galleys, and finally its 4 corner towers, which symbolize an architectural effigy of the community of Sighisoara. The judicial autonomy of the fortress has the famous jus gladi, the seigneurial right of capital punishment. The roof, which was rebuilt in 1677 by several craftsmen, one of them Wiet Gomber from Tyrol, with a spire that rises from a polygonal balcony made of paintings and stucco-decorated wood. The clock tower has 4 floors, out of which the 3rd one is the most architecturally interesting due to the Gothic vaulting on its ribs. At the beginning of the 17th century, the tower got a clock, subsequently remade in 1648 by Johann Kirchhoff, that was equipped with wooden statues belonging to a rather folkloric Baroque style. It boasts the pagan gods personifying the days of the week: Diana, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, and of course the sun. From here, rising above a steep slope, the fortress of Sighisoara continues with towers bearing the names of the guilds that built and maintained them over the years, as follows. The old prismatic-shaped Tanner's Tower, to which the Barber's Tower was attached in 1681, of which some remains are left. The strong Mower's Tower, repaired around 1583, probably the most picturesque one due to its plain variations at each floor, starting from the rectangular base up to the pentagonal shape, then to the octagonal shape of the upper floors, ending with the hexagonal roof. On the highest peak of the hill on which Sighisoara lies, not far away from the spot where the 16th century high school was located and near the main church of the town, The old square jeweler's tower of Sighisoara Fortress, assumed to date back in the 13th century, stood till 1863. Built 1 century later, but rebuilt again in 1630, the Ropemaker's Tower rises where the medieval fortification with battlements, guard path, and gunnery entrenchments goes along the entire height of the hill. The next one is the Butcher's Tower, built as an octagonal prism at the end of the 15th century and rebuilt hexagonally in the 16th century. Then comes the Furrier's Tower, small, square, with a pyramidal tilted roof, probably dating back to the 14th century, thus reaching at the end of the strong and sober rectangular Taylor's Tower, the second gate of the fortress, dating back in the same century as the previous one. The inner surface of Sighisoara Fortress ends with a short hexagonal shoemaker's tower built in 1650 and rebuilt 3 decades later, as well as with the smith's tower dating back in the same century and decorated with arcade friezes on the consoles. Guarded thus by the most impressive urban fortress gate in Transylvania, the town's roads follow urban courses swamped at every step by the atmosphere of the medieval times. But what dominates architecturally and spiritually the Old Town, the so-called Upper Town, is the 2 notable religious establishments representing 2 focalizing places for the historical and artistic interest. With their sobriety and massive aspect, they embody something of the defensive spirit of this establishment that has always defended itself from enemies coming from all horizons. On the lower plateau of the Upper Town, not far away from the clock tower and the main crossroad, the church of the former Dominican monastery dedicated to St. Mary has stood for exactly 700 years. Mentioned for the first time in 1298, when the famous Pope Bonifacio XIII gave 40 days indulgences for anybody who visited this settlement in Szesperch. The church was modeled in its present shape somewhere between 1484 and 1515, being then repaired several times till the last century. It is a Gothic basilica with 3 naves, whose dominating feature at the exterior is given by the steep sloped roof, powerful buttresses, and high western triangle pinion. The interior ends to the east with a rectangular chancel with polygonal apse and Gothic vaulting on ribs, redone at the end of the 17th century. In front of the chancel, a balcony gallery, a so-called Letnes in German, analogous to Sebbe's church, used once to unite the stands of the lateral naves, probably a suggestion of the Basilica in Sibiu, and was used by the patricians of Sighisoara during their religious services. Oriental carpets, reminiscent of those from the Black Church in Brasov, and representing a decoration spread by the Levantine commerce, replaced the absence of adornments in the religious establishments, starting with the triumph of Lutheranism after 1556 in Sighisoara. At the same time, a distinct look was given to the harmonic simplicity of the interior by the Baroque altar of 1680. Sculpted by Johann West and painted by Jeremiah Stanovius, the central board is decorated with scenes from the Savior's life. Jesus on the cross, and the placing into the grave. Been completed with lateral boards showing the images of Petru and Pavel, and of some angels sculptured in wood, as well as with its predella revealing Jesus among apostles, and its crowning presenting the raising. Finally, a bronze font dating back in 1440, belonging to a Gothic establishment in the neighborhood that no longer exists today, is part of the former Dominican monastery's inventory. Another church of St. Mary, famous and 2 years younger than the Dominican one, decorated by Leonardus, is located in Sibiu. This piece of liturgical furniture holds an inscription on the basin explaining that the work has been completed by the hand of Jacob, per manibus Jacobi. This craftsman completed a more slender work than the one in Sibiu, cited in all the books of Transylvanian art history, having a smaller pierced decorative knot higher on the basin, a frame of lily flowers at its foot, plaque friezes presenting either the evangelists John and Matthew, or medallions with star, lion, dragon, griffin shapes, and heraldic shields zoomorphically decorated as well. On the upper plateau of the old town, rising above the entire settlement, there is the St. Nicholas Church, or, in other words, the Church from the Hill, the Saxon Bergkirche of Sighisoara. With its heavy aspects of the exterior due to both the great mass of its roof and its sober parameter of rough stone, but rather svelte in the interior, this religious establishment that together with its fortifications represent the best-known monument of the town in its actual shape of hall basilica. With its three naves of the same height, separated by octagonal poles, it belongs to the 15th century. More precisely, it belongs to the period between 1429 and 1483, when architect-craftsmen used to work here within the contemporary construction sites of Brașov and Cluj, influenced at their turn by those of Prague and Kosovia, Kosice today in Slovakia. Thus, for the beginnings of the church are even older. The church being mentioned for the first time in 1345 when some privileges were given to Sighisoara by King Ludwig I of Anjou. It is from then the elegant polygonal apse chancel, finished towards 1400, is dated, as well as the buttresses on the southeast side, decorated with 4 statues composing a praying of the magics, thus reminding of the monumental plasticity from Sebeș. All these imagine a kneeling magic king, the other magic kings standing, and a Virgin Mary with child on her knees under a flower-decorated canopy, carved in several planes with depths and with its frontal side abandoned. wall painting fragments bearing a dominant tonality of red and green are also dated at the end of the 14th century, presenting the sufferings, tools, angels, and martyr saints of the Catholic calendar, among which is Ursula. The crypt with two cross-vaulted bays, the only one of its kind belonging to the old architectural style of Transylvania, reminds us of the Roman architecture of the first half of the 13th century. This has suggested the pre-existence on this spot of a chapel, a hall church with semicircular apse that would have probably been destroyed later by Mongolian invasion in 1241. Hypothetically, the present tower of the church could be dated from the same period, possibly a donjon of the mentioned castrum sex, included in the Gothic establishment with a slight but obvious deviation from the main axis. The interior of Sighisoara's basilica is lit by tall, large, tripartite windows with polyobate shapes, a specific characteristic of the final Gothic style. The ribs of the vaults, where the stone has been replaced with ceramic belonging to the same age, giving the image of a rather decorative, almost pictorial net, without any structural role. Everything leads to a final moment of the 15th century, which seems to indicate an inscription next to a southern window reminding of the year 1483, mentioning a Nickel Polner Burgmeister, that is to say a mayor, during whose time considerable work would have been done to the church. The northern portal belongs to the same age, dating in 1495, as for the southern one, near which there is a stone holding an inscription mentioning the year 1429, stating thus the beginning of that work, Inceptum est hoc opus in Latin. Its shapes indicate a very mature phase of the Gothic style, an interrupted arch with trapezoidal crowning over which there is a triangular fronton with floral decoration, leafage, and a chalice symbolizing the saint's sacrifice. A church porch with semicircle portal was built in its front in the first quarter of the 16th century, already indicating the dawns of the Renaissance. At the church from the hill, a few memorable events happened. In 1506, the meeting of the nobles and patricians of Transylvania were held here, and in 1631 the council chose Gheorghe Rákóczi the first as prince, received various ornaments in this glorious century, the 15th one. Among these, the wall painting, fractionally preserved, imposes itself as a historical and artistic interest, reflecting the cultural styles that existed at that time in this region. Thus, scenes from the St. George's legend can be seen under the windows of the northern lateral nave, among which there is the usual picture of the fight with the dragon in a landscape reminding of Gothic miniatures, where the fortress with crenels and the princess, with whose belt the beast was brought, are present. Altogether, these point to southern German influence. A donation from the Furriers Guild can be seen on one of the nave's vaults, namely the scene of Archangel Michael weighing the souls, surrounded by demons and holding the balance in one hand and the sword in the other, reminiscent of Western easel paintings and suggesting a floor with its tiles presented from perspective. Everything indicates a craftsman who was a very good painter and had obvious knowledge of the energetic move and chromatic harmony. Above the triumphal arch, which pilasters are decorated with vegetal elements, there is a kerchief of Veronica, held by two angels of apocryphal inspiration, that brings its founder's imagination in front of our eyes. Painter Valentius, sighted above with his wife, accompanied by escutcheons with heraldic shields referring to the noble craft of the donor. In the chancel, a groin shelters the Madon throne, holding an inscription dated 1484, indicating that the decoration of this vast establishment was completed by various craftsmen in different moments around that date. At the opposite extremity of the basilica, in the lower area of the belfry, there is a frieze presenting small scenes from the life of St. Francis and Saviour's sufferings. The whipping, the crowning with thorns, Ecce Homo, that points to an artist who remembered the picture, but who also was eclectic at the same time. Fortunately, the painter signed and dated his work. It was completed in 1488 by Jakob Kendinger, who came from St. Wolfgang in Tyrol. To end chronologically the number of these various paintings of Sighisoara's main church, we have to mention a doomsday scene from which only the background color and drawing with martyrs, apostles, angels, and saints' images, denoting a Renaissance atmosphere belonging to the first quarter of the 16th century, have been preserved, as well as a St. Christopher with Jesus on his shoulder scene, or the naturalistics Sufferings of St. Erasmus, also dating soon after 1500. The decoration of the basilica from the hill is completed with stone and wood sculptures belonging to the same age, the end of the 15th century and beginning of the 16th, as follows. The pulpit with Gothic moldings and polylobal motifs dating 1480, the holy water basin in the middle of the chancel, the fretwork decorated tabernacle in the chancel, all of them reminding of ancient French patterns. Also here, the stem-crowning wreath form, decorated pews can be seen, with their backs having wooden inlays imagining a fortress tower. This work was done by Johannes Reckmuth in 1523, a talented artisan led by Italian influences who gained his fame in Transylvania at that time. The so-called St. Martin's altar, originated from the church of the former Dominican monastery, was worked in a statuary modeling and well-thought coloring in a workshop in Sighisoara. It is dated back to sometime during the second decade of the 16th century, when Johann Stoss, the son of Glorious Veit and famous artisan of the Central Europe's polyptychs, used to be in town also. Various scenes from the sacred personage's life, from the child's revival to the dying man's Eucharist, are completed by the effigies of some important Catholic saints, such as St. Stephen of Hungary, St. Blasius or St. Dominic, the patron of the active order at Sighisoara as far as the 13th century.